Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Natalie if you're new, and it is awesome to see you today. Today's video is about flying with a toddler. We recently went to London and Italy and we took our 2.5-year-old with us. From Australia, it's about a 24-hour flight basically, and we had a stopover in Singapore. We flew with Singapore Airlines, which was really great, and on our return we ended up having a stopover in Copenhagen and then Singapore, so that was something I'll talk about in a little bit. But I have a couple of tips that I just want to share with you that will hopefully help ease your mind if you are planning on having a long haul flight or even a shorter flight with a toddler, and just my tips for that. One of the things you could do to prepare for your flight is just mentally prepare. So just be aware that you probably won't get much sleep and you may be fairly active on your flight, which might not be what you're used to. So our toddler ended up staying up most of the way to London for our first sort of flight to Europe. During the layover in Singapore, she fell asleep while I was kind of waiting for our pram to be unloaded from the plane. So she slept for that layover and then slept on the first part of the flight from Singapore to London. But pretty much the rest of the time she was awake, so that was probably over, what, more than 14 hours, like 18 hours. Like, just mentally prepare that you might not sleep at all during the flight and kind of come to terms with that and be okay with that. The other thing to mentally prepare for is to be active, so walking up and down the plane, having a toddler, you know, squirming on your lap maybe, or being kicked in the face multiple times, you know, that sort of thing. Just mentally prepare to be fairly active as well. The other thing I would say is just expect the worst and hope for the best. Tilly didn't sleep at all, but she watched the iPad a lot, so that kind of kept her calm for most of the flight. The last stretch of our flight to London was really tough. For the last 2 or 3 hours, she was over it. She needed to sleep, but she was just done with the flying. She didn't want to watch any movies or whatever we would put on. She would say, I don't want this one, I want a different one, I want a different one. And like every 5 minutes would be changing her mind about what she wanted, and she didn't want to do any drawing or colouring or anything like that. She just was over it. So that was really hard. That was probably the hardest part of our, you know, total flying trip. And, you know, we survived. We just walked and then we sat down and then we had a snack and then we watched a little bit of movie and then we walked again and then we snacked and then we watched a movie. Like, we just switched the activities every 5-10 minutes. I wanted her to sleep and I did try to get her to sleep, and I think she was asleep for landing. Like, she slept kind of at the very last minute. But, you know, when a toddler's overtired and just in a state, you can't force them to sleep as much as you want to. You know, they need to be calm and relaxed and all that kind of thing. So we just rolled with it, you know, just did what we could. You know, it's very hard, it's very frustrating, but we survived and we had a great trip. So yeah, just expect to have those sorts of moments. Some of the physical stuff that I would recommend bringing on the plane to make your flight a little bit easier with a toddler is, number one, a change of clothes, not only for them but for yourself. Within 20 minutes of our flight home, she had spilt yogurt all over her seat and knocked my husband's coffee onto him. So having that extra pair of clothes for him would have been handy. He didn't have any, but yeah, it just pays to be prepared if you can fit it into your carry-on baggage. When she spilt the yogurt all over herself, I was like, oh no, really worried about trying to clean it up, but the flight attendant literally removed like the whole base of her seat. It just kind of unclipped, and she went and got another one and replaced it. So in terms of making messes and having spills, like, if it happens, it happens. Just ask the flight attendant to come and help you, and they can, you know, help sort it out with you. So don't panic too much about spills or, you know, even having an accident or anything like that. You know, it happens and it can be sorted pretty quickly. Tilly is basically toilet trained. She still has accidents now and then, but for the most part she just uses the toilet. And we brought nappies with us on the flight to London. We used them. On the flight home we didn't bother, because on the flight to London we found that she didn't even need the nappy. She just went to the toilet. She was awake a lot, so it was fine, and we didn't end up needing the nappies or pull-ups. But, you know, depending on where you're at with your toilet training or not, you know, stage, you might want to bring nappies with you. Another thing you could physically prepare for your flight is obviously an iPad and lots of movies, or some kind of tablet. We had a debate before we went about whether or not we would bring the iPad, and I didn't want to. Thank God my husband won that argument, because we needed it every day of the trip. It was just a godsend, and we couldn't have done it without the iPad. So definitely bring an iPad or a tablet if you have one. Lots of movies downloaded, lots of TVs saved or whatever. There are screens obviously on the plane, and Tilly did use those from time to time, but for the most part she preferred, you know, her familiar movies that we had on the iPad. So yeah, it's up to you. Obviously you're parenting whether or not you like your kid watching TV. Typically, you know, at home we don't watch all that much TV, or we don't let Tilly watch much TV, but for the trip we just kind of threw everything out the window and just let her go crazy for that. Another thing you can bring on a flight with a toddler is lots of drawing and stickers and like little activities. So we had lots of reusable vinyl stickers, a water coloring, like a pen that you fill up with water and you can kind of watercolor onto some little sheets. We had like special magic markers as well that don't like show up unless they're drawing on this like specific paper. Those are like Crayola ones. We had, yeah, lots of stickers and reusable like scenes where you could change things. I had these little princesses which had little dresses, and you could kind of like dress them up with little stickers. So just find what you can at your local dollar store. Just find what you can, little activities like that that don't make too much mess. One thing I would say is if you're doing colouring in, I wouldn't recommend coloured felt pens, because the whole time Tilly was using them I had to watch her and like put the lids back on the pens and kind of supervise that activity. Whereas if it was just pencils, like it doesn't really matter if it falls down the seat beside her, because it's not going to like stain her clothes or whatever and make a mess. So yeah, felt tips I wouldn't recommend, but pencils, crayons, that sort of thing, perfect for this kind of experience. A really important thing to pack is lots and lots of snacks. Tilly did not eat a single bite basically of the meals that were provided on the plane. She is sort of a fussy eater, but I think just the atmosphere and the way it was presented and everything, she just wasn't having a bar of it. So she basically lived on like crisps and lollies and little muesli bar snacky things the whole time. Lollipops were a really good one because they kind of regulated her pressure for landing, and she never had any issues with landing and air pressure as far as I can tell. She was never crying or anything like that. She was quite happily just watching the movie on the iPad, sucking her lollipop. And lollipops are really great because they're hard, so they last long, and also they've got the stick to hold. So it just means that they're not going to like choke on that hard lolly. The other thing I would say with lollipops though is that Tilly dribbled a lot, so she was like covered in sugar syrup all over her hands and face. You know, having wet wipes handy on the plane is also really helpful. And that brings me to my next point, which is to definitely bring wet wipes with you. We only brought one pack, I think, of 80 wipes, something like that. And we used them up, and then when we were overseas, we just bought more overseas. So don't worry about packing every single thing, but just bring the essentials that you would need day to day, and then obviously you can buy more when you're over there. The other thing we have is a silicone bib which has a little catchy compartment, and when Tilly was having food or whatever, we just put that on her, and that helps to save mess. The other thing that happened was when she was hungry and we didn't really have any snacks left, we went to the galley, I guess you call it, where the flight attendants live, and asked them for a snack, and they gave us like a big muffin. So I just broke chunks of that off, put it into her silicone bib, and then she could kind of pick it up and eat it from there while like watching a movie. So they're really handy. And obviously within that, don't be afraid to ask the flight attendants for help or snacks or anything like that, because they have a lot of stuff back there that they can give you and sort of help you with your toddler as well. If you are in a bassinet row, just be aware that the tray tables are not attached to the seat in front of you, obviously, and we found that they were super wobbly and unstable, and that's when we had those spills in the first 20 minutes of our flight. So if you are in that bassinet row, just be mindful if your toddler is sitting there with, you know, spilly things like yogurt or juice or something like that, that they might knock that over, because Tilly, you know, she was kicking her legs and stuff like that, and it just got knocked. just bear that in mind. The tray tables can be a little bit wobbly. The other thing is, if you are in a bassinet row because you have a baby as well or something like that, just be mindful that the airline will prioritize babies to be in the bassinet. So if there are 2 families with babies, then they'll be, you know, both in that front row of 4 seats. And if your family is larger than, you know, 2 people and a baby, then you might be separated. So we had a family traveling with us basically the whole way home. They had 2 seats in front, and then there was another family next to them with their baby, and then the dad was sat beside me because they had a mum, a dad, a toddler and a baby. So the toddler and the mum were in the bassinet row with the baby, and then the dad was sat like behind them in the row just behind, next to me actually. Just be mindful that if you have a baby or, you know, you have a bassinet, that you might not necessarily be sitting together with your whole group if you are larger than 2 people. We bought a plane pal, which is an inflatable footrest that goes in between the seats for Tilly to kind of sleep on, and we didn't really use it at all. On the flight there we inflated it, but her feet were on it and nothing else was, so it was kind of pointless. She's 2.5 and she could easily just kind of fit in the seat on her own. She didn't need the footrest to help her sleep. I will be making a full video review of the plane pal soon, so subscribe if you haven't already so that you can be alerted when that comes out. With COVID-19 we had to do a few things, but it wasn't as stressful as I thought. Coming back home into Australia, we needed something called a DPD, which is a digital passenger declaration. So we made sure we had the apps downloaded and did all that. You needed to wear an FFP2 mask in Italy. It was very specific. So we had, in Australia, they're called N95 masks equivalent. So it's like a 3 or 4 layer type mask, not just a flimsy, like faux surgical mask. So yeah, you have to have a specific mask, and you also had to have your international vaccination certificate. So I just printed them out, had them in my passport wallet, and when we were at the airport they asked to see our vaccination status, and that was basically it. So there wasn't much to do in terms of COVID, just wearing masks and sanitizing as usual. But in terms of COVID, traveling with a toddler, you know, that didn't really affect things at all. The other thing I want to talk about is during passport and, you know, check-in, passport control, security, that sort of thing. Some airports had a special like family or special assistance area where you could go and kind of shortcut through security. So we found that in Singapore really, really helpful. We didn't have to line up with queues and queues of people. There was just one dedicated line through security, like through passport control, through security, like boom, boom, boom. No dramas at all. So if you can look around the airport for that, do find that. Obviously, you know, ask someone at the check-in counter if you're checking in like that, because they might be able to point you in the right direction. A lot of airports have kid or family friendly stuff, so just keep an eye out for it. Singapore airport also had a playground and like a children's play area. We found that really helpful during our layover on the way home. In Singapore airport there was like some food shops, and so we bought some snacks and Tilly was just playing around, which was great to get rid of some of those wiggles. One of the great things about traveling with a toddler is that the airlines or the airports let you take your pram all the way to the gate. So you drop off your bags at you know, check-in, then you can use your pram or stroller through the airport, through the layover, you know, when you're waiting at the gate. Just before you board the flight or prior to boarding, you take your pram to the gate staff. They'll quickly store it on the plane for you. When you hop off the plane, then they'll bring the prams out first and up to where you are so that you can get your toddler or child straight into the pram and then go to your layover or whatever it is that you're doing. So we found that super helpful during our layover on our way to London and Singapore, because she was asleep and we just lay her down in there, kind of reclined it, and she just slept the whole layover, which was brilliant. So yeah, prams are your best friend, obviously, and they are usable on a plane. So yeah, definitely bring your pram and keep it with you until you get to the gate. One little tip that I got from my friend who flew to Japan was that she got some sleepy medication for her kids she was very, very anxious about flying and just wanted that peace of mind. I think she spoke to her doctor about it, and her GP was just like, oh, well, I can give you this kind of stuff that will make your kids a little bit drowsy and sleepy, or he can recommend, like he recommended it to her or something like that. And she took it with her, and it just gave her that peace of mind. She never ended up using it, but you know, it's something to consider. And I'm not saying we should drug our kids, please don't get me wrong, but in this situation, flying for 24 hours or more, having layovers and lots of stressful interactions like passport control, security lines, being in that small confined space, you know, depending on your child's temperament and how you feel about flying with your child, it might be something you could talk to your GP about and just get that little bit of extra peace of mind. I didn't end up having time to go and get anything or really look into it, but I kind of wish I had, because like I said, at the last couple of hours on our flight to London, she was just out of control, way overtired, but she just couldn't calm down. And maybe in that situation, had I had some of that sleepy stuff, I might have used it with her just to calm her down a bit and let her have a really good sleep. That is another option. Obviously, I'm not condoning using it every day or anything like that. It is just a one-off thing. But yeah, it could be really helpful if you're like me and if you were like my friend. It can just give you that peace of mind and help you enjoy yourself a little bit more. So that is something to consider as well. The last thing I want to talk about is jet lag. So when we got to London, we arrived at 6 o'clock in the morning and we just stayed awake all day. It was really, really cool and fresh. So we just walked around London, walked around the city. We went to Borough Market and stuff like that, and it was amazing. So I would recommend, if you can, just stay up that whole day following your flight. On our return, we got in at about 7:30 at night, and it was just terrible. Like that night we all slept pretty well, but the following day was just not good. And Tilly sort of slept in, I slept in, and then she ended up, for the rest of the week, kind of following our arrival or our return home, she ended up waking up at night. She was wetting the bed all the time overnight and just wanting food and complaining of being hungry and just all that kind of stuff. So if you could arrive, I guess, in the morning, that's ideal, because then you can kind of try and stay up again and then sleep at nighttime, and that should hopefully readjust you. I've heard that traveling against the clock, so like back towards the southern hemisphere, is really, really tricky for people to adjust to anyway. So we got back on the Saturday night. The Saturday night was fine. The Sunday night was not good. And then on the Monday, I ended up sleeping in till like 1 or 2 o'clock. Lee took the day off work. Our car battery had died while we were over there, so we had no car. His parents were amazing. They came over and they helped. They took Lee to sort out the car battery, and Lee's mum took Tilly for the day, so that I just had a sleep and a rest, and I obviously needed it. I guess my advice would be, if you are coming back and you're worried about jet lag, if you can take a little extra time off work, or maybe get someone to babysit for you, whatever it is that's going to help you to get back into the swing of things, because it might take a little bit longer than normal. My in-laws were amazing as well. They picked us up from the airport and they brought us a bag of groceries, so I would definitely suggest buying some things before you leave, putting them in your freezer or in your pantry, so that when you get back you're not scrambling desperate for food or whatever it might be. So we had bought some frozen pizzas and some frozen like microwavable meals, and they brought us some bread, some milk and some butter, and like a hot roasted chicken, so that we could make some like chicken sandwiches. So that was amazing, and that's what we had for dinner and lunch, like the Sunday that we had gone back, because obviously our car wasn't working. We didn't really have any other groceries at home. We could have had our frozen pizza and that kind of thing, but it was just really good to have that. So again, think about when you come back from your trip, what is your toddler going to need? What are you guys going to need to eat? Is there something you can buy that, sure, like a microwave meal is not great and it's not the nicest, but if you're desperate, you've got no other food in the house, like it just might be helpful if you're feeling really jet lagged, or even if you're sick. You know, sometimes when you return from traveling a lot, like and it's really intense, you can come back home and get sick like I am right now. So those are all my tips for flying with toddlers. I hope you enjoyed this video. I am going to be making a review of the Plane Pal separately. I will also be making a video on our actual traveling with a toddler and what we did and some of the tips I have for actual, you know, being out and about in a new country with a toddler. And I will also be filming a packing video at some point as well, showing you exactly what we packed, how we did it, and yeah, what things we didn't need and what things were invaluable. Please subscribe if you want to see that content and if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!